In this lesson, we're going to talk about concentric diversification. So diversification in general is a business term that basically means you're expanding the business by going into new markets. So maybe you come out with a new product or you buy a company in a related industry. And concentric diversification is when you diversify, but you move into something that's very similar to what you're already doing. So for example, Apple started way back in the day and all they built back then were computers. Since then, they've diversified. They've started selling iPods, then iPhones, then watches and headphones. This is diversification. They're diversifying their product offering. And diversification isn't just a product strategy, it's also a content strategy. In fact, it's helpful to think of our content as if it were a product that we were selling. And that's because it sort of is a product that we're selling. Even if we're just trying to attract eyeballs, we're essentially in the attention business. Instead of selling a product like an iPad, we're selling content. And the people who are consuming our product may be paying in dollars, like if we're the New York Times and they're paying a subscription. But when we're talking about SEO, the currency is usually attention instead of dollars. And so this is what the American Press Institute says about diversification in the publishing world. It's not any different from physical products. They say expanding a successful news product works the same way. Now they're comparing this to product diversification. You have many options for where to move next, but you can't move too far from where you started. And so what does this have to do with our content and SEO and all that? Well, in another lesson, I talked about starting in your wheelhouse. In other words, when you start publishing content, it's a good idea to start publishing on topics that are very tightly within your organization's core area of expertise, topics where you have high EAT, and that'll give you a big advantage starting out. But after a while, you might find that you want to expand out from those initial topics, or maybe there are business requirements that mean you just can't start really tightly in your wheelhouse. Whatever the reasons, we're essentially talking about diversification. But in this case, it's content diversification. And the thing about diversification that you should be aware of is that it's risky. In fact, this guy named Igor Ansoff created this matrix that shows 4 possible growth strategies for businesses. He identified diversification as the riskiest of those 4 growth strategies. And this concept applies to content as well, and for the same reasons. If you're moving into a new topic area, you don't yet have the experience, the expertise, or the audience yet. If you have an existing audience, you also risk alienating them. For example, if you have a blog and you start publishing new content, your existing readers might not be interested in that new stuff, and they might unsubscribe or stop visiting your site for updates. And the same goes for attracting new readers. You might have some topics that new site visitors are really interested in, but when they see only a small percentage of your content covers those topics, they might be reluctant to subscribe or come back to the site. Those are just a few reasons. There are so many reasons why diversification is a risky strategy, and all these things will impact user behavior, which will impact SEO. And the other thing about diversification is that it's especially risky for those of us who are not professional publishers. And here's why. Your organization's EAT can often carry you. So for example, if you're a window company and you publish window content, well, you're going to have an inherent advantage over, say, the New York Times publishing window articles. Yeah, the Times is generally trusted, but you are the window company. You are the expert. So that EAT gives you a big advantage on window topics that are directly in your wheelhouse, directly in your core areas of expertise. As soon as you step outside window-related topics and into a new area, you are now in the publishing business. You've now stepped out from being a window company publishing what they know to being a publishing company. Like this credit union in Seattle, this is a bank publishing content on winterizing your home. And my guess is they haven't even covered a tiny fraction of all the topics they could cover related to banking and mortgages and credit cards, and pretty much everything they are an expert in, everything they do have high EAT in. As soon as they hit publish on that article, they stepped into the publishing business, and that's because they're now competing with every other website on the planet publishing content on winterizing your home. And so they've effectively given up their content's number one competitive advantage, and that's that they have a ton of EAT and all this banking stuff and none in winterizing your home. And that is why it's important to start in your wheelhouse unless you really know what you're doing. Only venture out when you either don't have a choice or you are doing so intentionally in order to grow your audience. But when you do diversify, just know that it's risky. Okay, so now that I've blown up about 60% of the content strategies on the planet and probably scared everybody a little bit, let's talk about how you do expand into new topic areas. Diversification as a business topic is pretty well documented around the web. Just do some Googling and you'll find lots of info on it. It's all focused around businesses and products and marketing and not necessarily content and SEO. But the same principles apply because those principles dictate behavior, and behavior matters in SEO nowadays, just like it matters in the real world. So there's a lot of info on diversification out there, but let's talk about the easiest method of content diversification. So you've reached a limit. You've covered all you can on the topics that are really tightly centered around your core areas of expertise. Now it's time to use concentric diversification. So concentric diversification is where you expand outward from the content you already have high EAT in, so topics that are directly in your wheelhouse. You expand outward into directly adjacent topics, so topics right next to those topics. So very, very similar topics. The closer those new topics are to your original topics, the better. So let's pretend we're that window company. We sell and install windows for people's homes. So here's a simple example of what our wheelhouse content might look like, the content that's right in our core areas of expertise. So we have the center here, which is our core area of expertise content, which is Windows. And so we move into the first set of topics here, and then the next set, and so on. And remember, this is just our wheelhouse content for the window company. We haven't yet started diversifying. So now we've covered all our window topics. So we think about how we want to diversify, and we're following this concentric diversification strategy. So we want to go into topics that are directly adjacent to Windows, right next to Windows. And so we brainstorm a few high-level ideas for adjacent topics, and we come up with these: remodeling, flooring, landscaping, doors, and roofs. Now, out of all these, we decide doors are the most closely related topic to Windows, and so we decide, okay, now we're going to use doors as our main topic area and publish content on that. And so we build out our content in doors now, just like we did with Windows. Once we're done with doors, maybe we decide roofs is the next closest topic, and so we expand into that. And so I'm using this mind map here to just map out some rough topics, and we'll cover this in much more detail a bit later in the practical application chapters, but the takeaway here is that we're expanding into adjacent topics using concentric diversification. Now, there's another thing we need to talk about here. In this example, it might only make sense for this window company to expand into doors if they actually want to start selling doors, and then into roofs if they actually want to start doing roofs, and so on. But maybe not. Maybe the goal is to drive visits from homeowners with the idea that they'll probably eventually need new windows, and if you become sort of the go-to resource on windows and doors and roofs and all that stuff, then you're increasing awareness of and affinity for the brand, so people will be more likely to call you when they do need windows. Or maybe the goal is to eventually expand into these other service lines. So think about that kind of stuff. You don't want to just publish content for the sake of publishing content. Do it strategically with an end goal in mind. And ideally, you've exhausted each topic before moving on to the next one, because it's really important that you have enough high quality content to build your EAT in this new topic area before you move on to new stuff. Otherwise, your SEO results are going to suffer a little bit. Okay, so let's sum up what we've covered in this lesson. Diversification is a growth strategy. It works for products and service offerings in business, and it also works for content. But it's also risky, and that's because you're doing something new. You're moving into an area where you might not have any EAT, and you might not have any audience. And you're covering topics that may or may not resonate with your current audience. And so this idea of concentric content diversification is a way to help you minimize the risk of expanding into new topic areas and build your EAT in this new topic over time so that you can continue to drive results.